So I'm doing this live, although I'm not sure live is the right way to do it, but this way I can answer the questions. But I'm hoping to make this somewhat quick. Obviously, a lot of people are freaking out about the Cobb announcement that they're not doing the flex fuel anymore, and that's totally a bummer. Flex fuel is easily half to 3/4 of my customers, and so those guys are now officially SOL, and that's a total bummer. But you gotta do what you gotta do. It's my opinion that they should just moved the flex fuel input over to fuel temp sensor and left the flex fuel active. That would have worked. We take a little more coding, of course, on their part, but definitely something that could have been done. So it's really a shame they didn't do it. And I realize not all the cars have fuel temp. Everything up to I think 11 or 12 I think has fuel temp, and then nothing after that. But at least taking care of part of it, and then hopefully they, could have spent some time. It's weird that Subaru got rid of the fuel temp sensor, and then you would think that it'd be weird that they would then that Subaru got rid of the sensor and then change the ECU entirely internally, so no longer even have that input available. So it's something that I would like to take the ECU apart and see if that pin where the fuel temp sensor is still exists. Now I know they did change the wiring harness in 11, so the pinout is very different in 2011. So it's possible that it is completely gone. It's a totally different ECU or whatever. But I haven't compared ECUs from 10 to 11 to see if there's a big difference in the ECU itself. I'm curious about that. Sometimes the ECUs show up with more inputs available and technically connected, just not being referenced for a handful of years. That does exist in the automotive world. So it'd be weird if Subaru's like, nope, I need a completely different part number for 2011. Right? I don't know. Maybe not. Honestly, I don't know. But let's see. No, speed density is not dead. Speed density is only dead on the GTR. So there's been a lot of misconceptions about that too. Like speed density doesn't work anymore. All of this stuff doesn't work anymore. And as far as I know, speed density still works. They didn't say anything in their email about getting rid of speed density. One thing that was not available was the flex fuel and anything associated with TGVs, EGR, air pumps, O2 sensors, and EVAP system. Anything emissions related. But I'm pretty sure speed density is still available. If it's not, then that is extra fucked. So, what the hell do you do if you want flex fuel? Well, you can go back to what we used to do before flex fuel was even an option with Cobb, and that was just doing two different maps. You had an ethanol map, you had a pump gas map. You still need an analyzer. It doesn't need to feed the ECU, but you should have something in there so you can check and verify that the concentration is correct in the tank. So let me see. I got some messages coming up. Answer quick. I couldn't recall if you had disabled a code for MAF delete. So not all codes are disabled. They didn't delete the ability to change check engine lights. They only changed check engine lights that were emissions related. All right, that's they didn't say you can't turn off any check engine lights anymore. They only turn off the check engine lights associated with emissions. Everything they did was emissions based, and the only reason flex fuel got deleted was because it used the TGV input, and TGVs are emissions. If they had used a separate input that was not emissions based, like fuel temp, like I was saying, then flex fuel could have stayed. So what do you do? Well, if you have a non-CAN bus car, so older than 2008, the most cost-effective strategy is to go with like a Link G4X system. They have some plug-in boards and they have some wiring boards based on what you need. If you need a totally crazy race car 8-injector setup, then you're going to need to go with a wire-in Link setup because the outputs are just not going to be available for what you want to do, and you're going to have to repurpose different outputs. So you need a wire-in one so that you can have 8-injector outputs. If you're sticking with 4 injectors and you just want flex fuel and motorsports features, then the plug-in boards are going to be totally adequate. So again, up to 2007, STIs and WRXs, Link has a great solution for you. The G4X is the way to go on those. It's way more powerful than the Plus. It's got math channels. It's got all kinds of stuff. It doesn't support pressure ratio tuning, which I'm really a big fan of. But that's fine because it does support a normal speed density fuel model. It doesn't support TMAF, which I'm also a fan of. It doesn't support a lot of things that M-Tron does support. And so that brings me to the 08 and newer guys. If you're 08 newer, Link isn't really going to be the option for you because their CAN integration is not done or even close to being functional for a USDM car. So the M-Tron is going to be the answer. They have the best CAN integration for Subaru so far. I think Motec also is. I know Motec's even more expensive than that. And so that's what this one is. This one is really about the M-Tron setup, about what I recommend for the CAN bus guys. Again, if you're older than 07 or older than 08, you can use M-Tron too, absolutely. I have my car's 2001 and I have M-Tron in mine. And I love it. It's awesome. You can do just about anything you want with it. So I'm going to show you right here on the table. This is my ideal setup, okay? This is the ideal setup for a customer if they wanted to go to a really good EMS with all the bells and whistles and have a car that just runs absolutely stellar. This is a KV12. KV12, I recommend if you're on a GR chassis, CAN bus car, quad AVCS, all of that. I recommend the 12 over the 8 if you're going to do 8 injectors. You can still do it on the 8. You just have to repurpose some outputs on there. I went through the pinout last night with Travis and discovered what combination you can still do with an 8. I personally have a 12 in my. This is actually from my car here, the 12. The KV8 does it. The difference between the two is just that this one is set up for 12 cylinders, up to 12 cylinders. Actually, technically do 16 or 24 if you did wasted spark and that kind of stuff. It just has more outputs available on it. But it still has 4 plugs on it. Now, the 8 uses 3 of them for inputs, outputs. And the way they do it is they have the main input is going to be your cam, your crank, your knock sensors, your communication, your CAN bus on this plug. It could be backwards, you can do the other way around. But then one of them is all inputs. Look at all these pins. All the digital and analog inputs. The other one's all outputs. And then the Lambda is on this one for the KV8. For the, it might be the other direction, but whatever. And then for the 12, it has the Lambda and then the additional outputs for the other cylinders in this 4th plug. Got a question coming in. Is the Link an option for my 05 GT? I would think so. On some pre-08 Legacy chassis, CAN bus. Yeah, I think 07 and up on the Legacy is CAN bus. How's Haltech's CAN bus integration? Not great. It's not great at all. In fact, Haltech is way inferior to this. I mean, so this has onboard Lambda. Two Lambda sensor drivers, 4-point LSU sensors. So integral into this ECU, you control 2 Lambdas. You just literally, here's your harness, you adapt it to the SCI. This is for a GR right here. And then here is the O2 sensor connector. It goes right into that plug like I was talking about. And there's room for 2. So if you needed 2 sensors, you can do 2. Now, Haltech doesn't have onboard Lambda. So if you want Lambda, 1 or 2 channels, you got to buy another Lambda controller, and it communicates via CAN bus to the ECU. Now this has it internally, so bam, you got that. This has way more inputs and outputs than the Haltech. The Haltech 2500 Elite on a GR chassis can't even come close to running everything that the car has on. You have to decide what not to use. You gotta say, okay, well, I don't want to use neutral position switch because I need to be able to use another one, right? Like, you have to give up features that the factory ECU had and that your car has in order to run a Haltech in the first place, which to me seems asinine. I don't know why you bother doing that. Like you can't run all 4 cams in a neutral position and a clutch switch to the Haltech because you're out of inputs long before that ever happens, and that's silly. Where with these guys, with the 8s, you have almost every input, if not every input available on it. That's why I have the 8 on the H6 STI that we did, the 17 STI with the H6. It's got a KV8 in it, and it runs a 6-cylinder with AVCS, AVLS, clutch, neutral. the SI drive functions. Like that's really cool too, right? The SI drive works with the M-tron, and in the Haltech it does not. The SI drive is so cool with the M-tron. You get to choose all these tables that you want. There's intelligent, sport, and sport sharp, and so you have these 3 columns of tables options that you can select with the SI drive. And you say, I want the fuel map 1, I want spark map 2, I want boost map 1, and on the sport sharp you go, I want fuel map 3, spark map 3, boost map 3, anti-lag map 3. It's like 8 tables that you can select for each mode of the controller, and that's really cool. So again, this is for a This is a 2011 up, I think is what this one is. So this one is going to go into DZ Can't Drive's 15 STI. This is his harness. And he has a KV8 going into his STI. So we're going to run the boom sling harness. We're going to run the KV8. This is a 12. This is mine. We're a 4.9 LSU Lambda sensor. It's the newer of the Bosch sensors. I'm running a Bosch T-map. I'll explain what that is. And I'm running an E-map sensor. Now these two overall are optional, but highly recommended. So I discussed this some yesterday. The M-tron allows you to select up to 3 fuel models and blend them wherever you want to blend them. Now, what's really excellent about this is that every fuel model has its pluses and minuses. Every fuel model has an area of operation where the calculation is really accurate and then an area where the calculation is not. And so by using different fuel models and the ability to blend at any percentage you want, you can choose to let one fuel model be the primary dominant fuel model in one area of the operating curve so that it's the most accurate. So this is really handy in making the car run very consistently, especially in the presence of issue. Like they say you get a boost leak. If you're regular speed density and you get a boost leak, you have air coming in the turbo, blowing out some pipe somewhere, and we'll say the boost control system will now more aggressively try and hit that boost by closing the wastegate. And if you manage to still hit the target boost, the speed density calculation isn't going to change. It's going to think everything is the same. But an increase in back pressure means a reduction in volumetric efficiency, which means the engine will now actually be running too rich. So you'll get a boost leak and you'll run rich. Even with speed density, for some reason people think with speed density that a boost leak is okay, you don't run rich. Well, they're wrong, because your exhaust pressure goes up, that lowers your VE, and now you actually have less air going into the engine, even though the pressure in the manifold is the same. So you run rich. Well, if you use pressure ratio tuning, which is what this sensor here is for, this sensor is for the exhaust manifold pressure, then what it does is it sees that the exhaust manifold pressure is going up, and it goes, oh, well, your VE is going to be going down. So you can have speed density, regular speed density, running as well as this EMAP, and you can blend them at whatever percentage you want. Let's say they're 50-50. Well, now it's going to take out 50% of the error that was generated by the boost leak. So you're going to run a little rich, but not as rich as you would have. The TMAF sensor is for what M-tron calls TMAF. And TMAF is based on the throttle body size. They know how much surface area is in a throttle body at various locations of throttle body opening, right? Various positions from 0 to 100%. And then based on the surface area or the flow rate of that throttle body, if they know the pressure on both sides of it and the temperature of the air, you know the mass going past that point. And if it goes past the throttle body, it goes into the engine. So what they do is they measure the pressure and temperature of the air on one side of the throttle body, pressure and temperature of the air on the other side of the throttle body, calculate the mass going in the engine, and then bam, you have mass airflow. Now, that's a great system. It's really good for transients. When you tip the throttle in, it's very good at catching the amount of airflow that's going to go into the ECU, because it calculates it based on throttle position and the differential pressure across it. So it's a really good system. So in transient operation, it's really, really accurate. But a wide open throttle, the accuracy drops. And so that's what's really cool about this system, is that I can use this TMAF at idle, I can use it in cruise range, but then when I get into power, I can either use regular speed density, or I can use pressure ratio with the EMAF or with the EMAP and boost pressure. Right, I have all these options that I can do with the M-tron. Now, in association with all that happening at the same time, I can run flex fuel, I can run anti-lag, I can run gear cuts, I use flat bed shifting, I could have a force. boy, my brain just stopped all of a sudden. Strain gauge operation on my shifter if I want for cut. I can do SI drive with all the modes. It also knows the traction control button is on and off, so I can set Sport Sharp to be all my aggressive mapping, but not anti-lag or launch control, and then push the traction control button. It sees the traction control button is turned on and says, oh, okay, we no longer care about traction. We're going to enable launch control and anti-lag, and this stuff will turn on with the traction control button. So there's all kinds of really cool features that you can do with this system, stuff that you would never be able to do with the factory ECU. And not just that, but the factory ECU, you get one fuel model. Technically two if you use Cobb hybrid, right? They have MAF or speed density, and you can blend those, but it's one and then the other with a blending period in between. That period in between is very small, right? So you're one or the other. This can be 3 simultaneously, whatever ratio you want. You can double weight, you can triple weight, you can do whatever with the fuel models in there. It's really it's really sweet. So my ideal setup is EMAP, TMAP, wideband, harness, Mtron. So this is my ideal setup. Now, like I said, you don't have to do this. I really recommend that though. The TMAF is so easy to do, and it makes such a big difference in how well the car runs in intermediate throttle positions and everything. It's super accurate, works really good. I really like that. I used to hate it until I learned that there were some workflow things with Mtron I hadn't figured out yet. My own fault. I used to hate the Mtron software until I figured out some of the hotkeys that they had bound. I figured out how to use that too. So it's the workflow has sped up significantly with Mtron compared to what it was when I first started using it. Still a little slow. Still takes a long time to set it up because there are all these features that you got to do. And it's a good idea to do the fuel models as individually as possible originally. Like when you first get it tuning, you get running, focus on getting that, make sure that's correct, get the TMAF set up going well. Then work on the pressure ratio, get the VE going, get that set up well. And then do speed density as the backup and get that, or mass airflow. I mean, mass airflow is also an option. In my own car, I'm gonna run a 4-inch or 3.5-inch MAF sensor. I'm gonna use a GM card style MAF from like an LS3 and put that in the turbo inlet. So I'm gonna have mass airflow, TMAF, and EMAP pressure ratio based tune. That's what my RS is gonna be once I get it back together good. It's almost there. Lane was working on the kit this week and it's almost done. So that's what will be happening on that. So again, Mtron 8 or 12 based on whether you need lots of injectors or not. Boom spring harness. When you order the harness, you have to tell them what ECU you're running. Obviously, if it's an 8 or a 12, if it's a 12, then you'll have more stuff used than what you had originally because he has, more things he can add on. Or a 16, they have a 16 also. But the 12 or 8 harness. 4.9 LSU, Bosch. This is the 3.5 bar. Now, the important thing to know about this sensor is that this doesn't read very far in a vacuum. It only goes to 50 kPa, which is about 7.5-ish pounds of vacuum, or less than atmospheric pressure. So you can't put this in the manifold because it wouldn't work. But your boost pipe, well, it's never reading vacuum, right? So like we're never actually even using that half a bar in the boost pipe because it's never going to be at a vacuum. It's always going to be at atmospheric or above. So we get 3 bar above atmosphere with this sensor, and that's a lot of boost. So that shouldn't be a problem. What else? This is just an example of one of the many pressure sensors available that you can use for EMAP. This one's a Honeywell sensor. This one's 150 PSI, I believe. I forget which one this was. Yeah, 150. 150 PSI A, so that's perfect. I mean, I don't plan on having 100 pounds of exhaust manifold pressure. That means I'd be running like 70 pounds of boost. That would be something. That's not true, probably 50 pounds of boost. All right, so some questions coming in. Let me get those real quick. Let's see. Why not use the plug-in ECU they offer Subaru? Because it doesn't work for USDM. Plain and simple. It doesn't work for the US cars. Like a lot of guys ask me that, and I keep telling them every time. It does not work with the US cars. US cars have different harnesses, different pinouts, and everything else. So you can't use it. Any experience with HP tuners? Yeah, I've used HP tuners in the past. I have no plan on using it for Subarus. I have it. I've been using HV tuners for about 20 years now, I think, probably. But yeah, I mean, maybe I have to in the future. Maybe I have to. I don't want to be honest with you. I'm not a fan of the way they do stuff in the systems I do use, much less adding Subaru stuff to it. But I guess I should probably open the program up and look a little more closely at it. How's Mtron's flat foot shifting different from Cobb's flat foot shifting? Well, it works. Let's start with that. Obviously, it needs to be adjusted. Cobb's is just, they just changed the factory rev limiter when you apply it. It's just a regular fuel cut, you know, no ignition cut, that kind of stuff. So with Mtron, you can do ignition, fuel, you can do ratios of such. You can have the point be different based on what gear you're going into. So, you know, as your ratios change, the RPM that you will be in when you enter the next gear is different. And with the Cobb system, you have one set point, and it's got to be, you know, somewhat close, that kind of thing. Also, you can set it up so that it knows what RPM is supposed to be at. So if you shift a little early, then you'll have the right RPM it'll cut to. It won't just be, again, like, you know, 300 RPM off or 500 RPM off, you know, close. You can make it be the exact RPM it's supposed to be. What does the ballpark cost for what you're going to hear? This right here, if it was an 8, if this was an 8.
Oh, it says extra support.
Oh, okay. I'm like, this is a gift from somebody? Gotcha.
I mean, kinda.
Right. If it's KV8, their retail 3,400. This is 700. This is 100. That's about 100. This guy, I think, is like $60 or something like that for the Honeywell one.
1050 to the trick.
So now I'm doing because this whole thing, I'm doing a deal. I haven't put it on the website yet, and I guess this is only like the second time I've mentioned it. I'm going to do a package deal on these where you buy these two, the harness and the Mtron, and you get the sensor, O2 sensor, free with it. I need to get some more pricing information. I can double check a few things. If I can include a T-map, I think I like to do that too, but I don't think I can swing that. I think that just cuts way too much of the margin, as it is. Parts have shit margins anyways, but the deal is that I know I'm going to do these two free O2, and then we'll add these on optionally afterwards. You need to get the sensor, then you have to get the harness, you know, the 4-pin plug. Ideally, what you would do is you would just run the pressure and the temperature onto your MAF harness, right? If you're not using the mass airflow sensor, then you would use the temperature and pressure in that harness for this guy. And then that would be perfect, because then you still have boost pressure on the manifold, then you have boost pressure in the pipe and temperature in the pipe, and that's exactly what you need for both speed density and TMAF. So the only issue with doing that is the MAF sensor on the factory ECU uses a 12-volt supply. So as much as I would like to just make a quick harness that's plugged into the end of the MAF, you can't do that. This is a 5-volt sensor, or 5-volt powered sensor, not a 12-volt powered sensor. So the harness would require one stray wire to go somewhere else to get 5 volts. But that could come off of a TGV signal wire, or not signal, a TGV position wire. They have 5-volt supply there. So you could use that. You could use lots of things. You could technically put the pressure signal here to a TGV position if you had to do that on a race car or whatever. But ideally, you'd go in the MAF sensor location and then just get 5 volts off of like a boost pressure sensor or something like that. And then that's it. So it wouldn't be too difficult to get the signal wires to the ECU because they already exist. Temperature and pressure, you just use the MAF signal and temperature for IAT on that sensor. So not too hard to install. The hardest point, like I said, is just getting a 5-volt to it, and that's not very difficult anyways. O2 sensor is cool. It comes from Boom Slang with this semi-long harness, which is more than enough to get into the engine bay. And then I buy the sensor with the 1 meter lead, right? 1 meter lead, so that we have no issues getting to anywhere in the engine bay with exhaust. That's what we used on the H6 car, and we were able to get it with the O2 sensor all the way in the front of the engine, in the downpipe off the turbo. So that worked out pretty good. So my goal is to have a base configuration in here. So it won't have the motorsport stuff enabled and all of that. But I'm gonna have a base configuration in here because the harness is fixed, and so therefore the inputs are fixed. So this will use all the same inputs of all the ones that we sell. Will have the same inputs and outputs. Only differences will be if you need to do 4 extra injectors, then I will have to move 8 pins in this harness to make it work if you have a KV8. If you have a KV12, I won't have to move shit. We just add the extra wires to actually this harness here, add the extra 4 wires to the injectors and run those 4 wires in the engine bay, which is fine because these 4 wire or 6 wires are going to the engine bay already, right? You got to plug this in and run this plug into the engine bay, the O2 sensor. So if you're adding 4 injectors, then it's easier to add 4 wires to this to run also along with these. And you get a KV12. It is more expensive with the KV12 by a few $100, but the output is handy. The ease is there. If we do it the other way, we need to steal 4 wires from other functions. So in a race car situation, we would be able to steal the emissions controlled stuff. So the TGV drive wires, potentially the secondary air pump, those 2 wires for the secondary air pumps, each solenoid for the air valves on the back of the head. You could use one of those for one injector, one for the other injector, and then you could use what else? There's a few things you could use technically, and move some things around. But again, that'd be a car that had no emission stuff on it. The cool thing about this too, for flex fuel, is the sensor plugs in, not plugs into it, but the sensor feeds directly to this, right? So you put it right into one of the inputs. If you use, I don't know what you would use necessarily right offhand, but any of the available inputs, and you put it to what's called a digital input on this, and the digital input on this would read directly from the sensor. No little converter box, no 0 to 5 box, none of that. And the ethanol content analyzer outputs PWM with frequency, pulse width, and it tells the ECU not only ethanol concentration, but also fuel temperature. So fuel temperature is really sweet with that. I like fuel temperature, so a lot of cars don't have fuel temp. It's nice to add fuel temp. Fuel temp can affect your fuel trims by 9%. So I'd like to have fuel temp properly compensated for so that we're not dealing with weird fuel trims all the time. Oopsie. Last question, what's that? Think the M-Tron can connect to auto trans over CAN? I'm not sure what you mean by that. CAN isn't communication between devices in that regard. It isn't like, hey, I'm telling you this, did you get that? Oh yeah, I got that, thanks. It isn't that at all. CAN is just like a bus with information on it. And all the modules can decide if they either want to pull information off or add information to the bus. So there isn't like, hey, talk to the auto trans and tell it this stuff, and then it'll tell you these things back. It isn't like that at all. It's like people standing in a room and just yelling their social security number, right? You can either stand in the room and yell your number out as well, or you can listen and write it down. So it's the same kind of thing with the CAN bus. There's no actual communication as far as like a give and receive. The communications are timed in that it looks for a gap in the bus and then says, oh, it's my turn to talk, and then it talks. And then if anything wants to listen, it can listen to it. But there's no like direct communication. So what the ECU does, the ECU puts on the bus, it puts RPM and throttle position and things like that go onto the bus for the DCCD controller and shit like that. And then the ECU listens for other stuff on the bus, and it goes, oh, wheel speed's what? Okay, sweet, right? Because the ABS module, puts out the wheel speeds, puts out all 4 wheel speeds. The steering wheel sensor, steering position sensor, steering angle sensor they call it, is on the CAN bus, and the ECU can read that if you want, which is cool because you can use that information in the ECU if you want. Subaru doesn't use it in the ECU, they use it only in the DCCD, but it's there, and if it's there, you can listen to it and use that data. That's the cool thing with CAN, is you don't need it to go, it's not like an IP address, right, where you're sending this packet of data to this location, right? And if you want to get that data, you got to either intercept it somehow or ask, hey, can I borrow that data? Or can you send it to me too, right? It doesn't do that. Can, just all the information is there, and then you just pick off what you want to listen to. So I can add stuff that listens to that information on the bus, as long as it knows what that data is, as long as it can decode what those bytes or bits turn out or mean in their language. So the information is there, and that's really cool. Nothing is sent with an address. It's not like you got to go here and deliver this information. You can do it. It's not like that at all. It just yells it on this line, which is super handy actually. So if the TCM is just looking for data from the ECU, then it depends on what data it's looking for. I don't know what the TCM is looking for from the ECU, but it should be, most of it should be there. Built STI export and flex fuel tune, 150,000. I know what they have, right? Yeah, it's already built. Speaking of missions, does it output radio signal to the diag port, assuming you have the parts installed? No. So that's a problem with standalones, is that they don't do emission stuff. None of that. They don't do OBD2. So you can't just plug in an OBD port and then be like, hey, what's going on, right? That doesn't exist. Some of them have some limited OBD functionality through the port. I don't know if this does. I've never tried it. I don't know, honestly. But some have some where you can just ask it like, hey, what's going on? But it isn't the same format. It isn't the same, testing stuff. None of that stuff exists. So this is not emissions compliant. This is just for guys that want the flex fuel back. They want motorsports features. They want the car to run really freaking amazing. They don't want to deal with these weird issues and hiccups and stuff. They want something that starts when you turn the key. They want those features. They want that stuff back. So again, this is not the cheapest solution. This is just the ideal one, in my mind. Let's see, I'm checking to make sure I missed any comments from anybody. Oh, echo, you said. I thought I read echo. Like Espanol. I don't know why it's echoing. I'm just in a little room. Still feel under the weather some. Not nearly as bad as I was yesterday, though. But, I mean, look at my face. My eyes are open. Yeah, for sure. H tuners will be the cheapest option until they're in the EPA crosshairs, and everyone gets their time, with the EPA pressure. So that exists. Someone asked me about no, so not at all. An access port will not work with anything anymore. Oh, I'm not feeling better. Just slightly better than yesterday. Yeah, HPRs won't last long. They're gonna bail. They're gonna bail on it too. So it's just a matter of time that they're gonna bail on it. So yeah, no access port, right? There's no factory ECU anymore. The access port talks to the factory ECU. It uses OBD protocol and all of that. It will not communicate. But it doesn't mean you're screwed. It means actually you're lucky. You're lucky. You're lucky because you have access to way more stuff than you ever had access to before, right? That CAN bus is there, like I was talking about, right? The CAN bus is there, but the M1 also has its own CAN bus. It has two CAN buses built into it. It has one that can work with the OEM system, which is a slower refresh rate and a slightly slower data bandwidth. But, it works fine. But you have a second CAN bus on there. In fact, that's this wire right here. So this is another CAN bus right here, this DTM4. That's CAN bus 2. CAN bus 1 is in the harness to talk to the Subaru modules and everything. And it comes from one of these pins right here, this twisted pair. So you see that twisted pair there is the one to use for the factory ECU, and then another twisted pair next to it comes down this wire and talks on this CAN bus here. So what's really cool about that is that now you have access to all sorts of CAN gauges, screens, displays, touch screens, and everything. So I'm doing 3 M-Trons here in the next couple weeks. All 3 of them are getting a 3.5-inch touchscreen setup from BTI. BT Innovations. They have a whole suite of CAN instrumentation. The one that we're getting has push buttons on it. So you can adjust your boost setting if you want. You can turn off trash controls if you want with the screen. You can do, we're doing a special, he's doing a special one for me that has a push button for logging. So that my customers that have that screen, if they want to log, they just hit the button, bloop, and it'll log, it'll tell the ECU log, ECU will record a log. And these things record everything. First time I opened a CSV from M-Tron on one of their logs, my computer slowed down. It was like, this data, like the Matrix, right? It was crazy. So these things record everything. And so we have a little logging button on a 3.5-inch screen, bloop, hit the button, it starts logging. And then you hit the button to stop logging, and then you just connect your computer to it later on when you want, and then you send it to me. So that's really sweet. But you have 52 mil gauges, like from BTI. M-Tron sells different ones, but I like the BTI ones because they have these screens where you can have 12 parameters displayed simultaneously. So I have 2 52 millimeter BTI gauges in my car that display all kinds of engine parameters that are located on the CAN bus from the M-Tron, and it's super cool. So, and that means you can also, if you don't want to use factory cluster, if you got a race car, you're gonna need all that crap on there, you can decide, hey, I want to use a 8-inch screen. You can get the M-Tron screen, you can get the BTI screen, you can get the Mako cluster mount thing that fills the factory cluster area and gives you a spot to mount the screen. Like, there's all kinds of cool stuff that you now have access to. And I'm excited about that. There's also push button keypads. Like, you get this keypad, it's got 8 buttons on it with little faces that you put on there. You can turn on and off motorsports functions, you can activate, whatever you want. And if you do like a PDM in your race car, like the Motec PDM, it works with the M-Tron. So you can have wipers and trash control and anti-lag on, and your drink cup, your cool suit power, all that stuff can be on this CAN-based little keyboard, and that you mount somewhere, and you boop, boop, engine start, engine stop, all that stuff is on there if you're in a race car situation. So you can use the M-Tron with a nice PDM. That CAN bust, keypad works. Like, there's all kinds of really neat stuff that you can do. You can do them all at once. You can daisy chain them all. So, and I can have the push button screen with the logging and the boost adjustments and whatever adjustments that I want to have on that screen, and then also have the keypad with the motorsports features or my windshield wipers or whatever. And then I have another keypad if I wanted to, where I could adjust other stuff. So you can run as much of that as you want until the bus is clogged. But they have like 24 channels with a ton of stuff. There's just so many things you can do. So it really opens up the world. You're let out of this cage, by doing it. It's really sweet. What about adjustments for tire sizes to speedometer?
Sounds good, man.
Speedo is currently done by the ABS module, so no, I don't think you can do anything unless you were to intercept and then retransmit, but you'd end up using both buses at the factory 500 hertz instead of 1000 hertz, so you kind of would screw yourself a little bit on that. But you could technically read the wheel speeds, remove the cluster from that bus, and put the cluster on a different bus. Now, if you use the screen and got rid of the factory cluster, then yeah, you could absolutely alter the wheel speed indication to read differently on the screen. You could absolutely do that. And if you wanted, if your factory cluster with that small screen could display a corrected speed, even though your cluster is going to read the wrong speed. Those are some options, but no, wheel speed right now is still via the VDC module, because trash control still works. VDC stuff still works in the car. All that stuff still works if it's set up right. You're not losing that. You can set up a requested torque cut when wheel speed, when wheel slip is indicated, and have all those things still work. ABS still works. DCCD still works. You can choose to use another DCCD controller, or choose to have the Mtron control the DCCD and all kinds of stuff like that. The possibilities are really just about endless on that. So, any obvious issues with using a GM sensor to measure ethanol content the car has? That's what everyone's using. Everyone's using a GM ethanol sensor. Every Cobb kit's got a GM ethanol sensor. So no. Yeah, I don't know. I'm not sure where you're going with that question. That's the sensor everyone's using. And your Cobb sensor will still work, which is a GM sensor, with your Cobb kit if you have one. You just won't feed the 3 wires from the sensor into the Cobb converter box. You'll feed those 3 wires into the Mtron instead, and then you'll have all of that. So, all right, it is time for me to tune a car and eat some lunch. So I want to just give you guys a lowdown on all of that, show you what I think the ideal situation is, and get you going on that. Now, I do want to say, be patient. There might be some solutions in the works for guys that are in. If you have, a car that's got all the factory stuff, you just want flex fuel. There might be some solutions in the works to make that function again. That's all I can say because it's all speculation right now, based on some conversations that I've had. So we're working on it. I can't guarantee anything in that. I can guarantee this works. But now, if you're talking, you got missions delete stuff and you're doing all kinds of crazy shit on your car, you basically have a race car, then this is a better option. So, all right. Thanks for stopping by, guys. I hope that helps a little bit. And yes, I'm with Corey on that. Yeah, and vote out those crooked politicians. Hold them accountable. Have a good one.